Hi, I'm Brett Middleton, and this video is designed to help you choose the best exhaust system for your Subaru. But what you can also do is use it as a bit of a guide for choosing exhausts for different turbo model cars. Now, of course, we would like to think that you'll choose to buy an MRT exhaust system, but depending on where you are in the world, obviously that will be affected by the availability of parts. And of course, the different model Subarus have got different design components, but effectively the design is effectively the same, but the components just vary. So we're going to use an MY09 STI Impreza as a guide, and of course with the Impreza models now, they have this big barrel across the back. The difference between the STI model and a WRX model is one has a single outlet, whereas the STI's got the quad outlets. Now, the thing to choose and be careful with some of these parts around the back here is the restriction on the design of the quad outlets. Some have very, very small collectors into twin outlets, which can cause a restriction. Some use different types of barrels, which also can flow different amounts of exhaust gases. Now, the barrel on the back of these cars has a big effect on how much noise, but also has a big effect on just how much exhaust can actually flow out through the back of the exhaust system, which ultimately will affect boost and overall performance of the car. Have a good look about the way the pipework comes around the back of the car. Is the pipework going to reduce the ride height of the car? Does it have really big, thick flanges? Some of the low-cost Chinese exhaust systems which are available on eBay have very, very thin flanges with only 2 bolts, and after a couple of months the flanges distort and then start to leak, and you end up with a leak between the 2 flanges where they bolt together. Hence the reason why on the MRT exhaust system we use very, very thick flanges which will never actually warp at all. The other thing is some exhaust systems use stainless steel, which actually can rust. You want to make sure you use the good quality stainless steel, and the best way to test that, if you're not sure about what they're offering you, is put a magnet on the exhaust system. If the magnet sticks, you know it's got a lot of ferrous metal in it, but if it doesn't stick, then you know it's got a high content of stainless steel. The other thing is choose with the flanges and make sure that they're good quality flanges. Some of the flanges are got poor quality welds. You'll see when you do fit a flange and the way it's welded, is it TIG welded or MIG welded? Has it burnt? Has it been cleaned off? And also the way the exhaust system hangs underneath the back of the car. You'll notice if you just look carefully up here, the MRT exhaust system has a little lug on the end, so there's less chance of the rubber hanger actually sliding off. We see some exhaust systems come in where this actual hanger is like sitting like that. So you want to make sure that you have an exhaust system that won't slide off in normal operating conditions. The other thing is to look at the position of the exhaust system underneath the car. Is it hanging down? Does it sit nice and neat? Does it reduce the ride height? And also, is it designed in such a way that it will flow the most amount of gases? Unfortunately, some exhaust systems these days are made up by a collection of joints with straights and bends welded together. Now, they might look nice on the outside, but on the inside they're obviously going to have penetration of the welding, and often that can have a big effect on flow as well. You notice on our exhaust system, this pipe particularly here, and also the one that goes up and around into the rear barrel, is actually one piece. So it'll actually flow the best amount of gases, and of course it looks a bit better as well. Does your exhaust system have a center muffler? 90% of the exhaust systems we fit to Subarus these days we supply with a center resonator, because it's the center resonator that reduces the drone when you're driving on the freeway in 5th and 6th gear with low engine RPMs, and it's the pulsing of the engine cycling of the combustion process down the exhaust that causes that drone. And by putting a reasonably large hot dog or resonator in the center of the exhaust will provide an area for the exhaust pulses to expand and then contract as it goes out through the rest of the exhaust, and that's what takes away that drone. These types of mufflers don't affect the flow, and they don't affect any restriction from a performance point of view. Obviously there's a small cost increase, but the overall benefit is a more enjoyable car to drive. Does the car have a flexible joint? You know, when the engine's moving, you'll get that type of movement. Now, a lot of exhaust systems these days, from a manufacturer's point of view, always have at least 1 or 2 flexible joints. Unfortunately, a lot of aftermarket exhaust systems, to reduce costs, don't include any at all. But of course, you've got to remember the front half of the exhaust is connected to the engine, which is mounted on engine mounts with rubber, and they move. The back half of the exhaust is mounted on rubber mounts which hangs off the chassis, and of course the engine moves independent of the chassis, and you have to have some allowance of movement between the two components. Hence the reason why we fit a flexible joint and why the manufacturers do as well. We no longer use the braided flexible joints because over a period of time they can get rubbed on the road and will wear out and get damaged. These ball joint design ones are actually a big version of what comes factory standard from the Subaru standard exhaust system, and they're a lot more durable. The next point to keep aware of is the position of the rear O2 sensor. Now on the later model cars, not the older cars, that is very, very critical because it has to be after the catalytic converter, because it measures the unburnt exhaust gases after it's been scrubbed and cleaned up, and as it goes out through the exhaust, the cat converter has a big effect on obviously emissions, and that is what the ECU sensor looks at to tell if the cat converter is working correctly. If you've got it in the wrong position, you'll get sometimes poor fuel economy, drivability. The car will be a bit of a yo-yo, it'll surge on the freeway on light throttle, and of course you won't get the best performance out of your car. If you've got the wrong size cap, that can also affect the check engine light coming on the dash. And in extreme situations, the simple positioning of that sensor, if it's incorrect, can have an overall effect on cruise control and some other less safety related issues with modern day cars, because on the newer model cars, if they get a check engine light coming on, the first thing they start cutting out is cruise control and some of the ancillary devices. The other thing to keep in mind is it's common on Subarus for some manufacturers to fit the catalytic converter down here underneath the floor. Originally, Subaru supplied a cat converter in the downpipe. By having the cat converter down under the floor will actually in some situations allow the car to come on boost earlier, but the downside is it's not as strictly legal as what it should be if it's in the correct location of the downpipe, but also the positioning of the O2 sensor then has to be modified, which can cost anywhere up to $350 because you can't cut and modify that wiring harness because it's actually stainless steel wiring. You have to modify the wiring harness up under the dash because, of course, if you've got your cat converter here, this sensor has to be relocated and put further back down behind it. In an MRT exhaust system, we put the cat converters in the downpipe, which is the original factory position. These days, more often than not, we use a metallic cat, not a ceramic cat. The metallic cats flow better and have the same ability as the old design of the ceramic cats. They're a lot more durable, they're not as brittle, and of course they give a lot more horsepower. And again, I just want to point out some of the simple things. I get my cameraman to come around this side. On this side of the exhaust system, you'll see there's a bracket. Now this bracket is critical for the exhaust connecting to the back of the transmission. Now some exhaust systems don't have that bracket to connect, but the simple thing you'll notice on an MRT exhaust is actually designed like the factory one. So when your mechanic is fitting the exhaust, it fits up onto the back of the turbo and then just sits under this hook, so the mechanic can then let it go, it'll sit there in place, he can get the nuts and bolts, come back up, and he doesn't need another mechanic to help him with 4 sets of arms and things like that to hold it all in one place. And these little things have a big effect on how easy the exhaust system is to fit. On this model car, we put flanges up here because of course it's a lot easier to ship the components, and also if the exhaust system gets damaged in an accident or you drive over something, you can buy the individual components to replace the damaged ones. Now, the last thing that I wanted to point out is if you look from the front of the car, you'll notice how neat and tidy the exhaust system sits underneath the car. I'm going to show you in a minute an exhaust system that we actually removed off this car yesterday that had another brand aftermarket exhaust system, and it was actually sitting a full inch lower than this one because it was made up of a combination of universal fitting exhaust system parts made in China, sold by a well-known brand here in Australia, and it was an absolutely ugly way to fit an exhaust system onto a Subaru, because if you want to have the exhaust fit as accurately and as neatly as this, it has to be made to suit the particular model. You can't get universal fitting exhaust systems to suit a whole heap of different Subaru models these days because of the change in the orientation of the turbos, the chassis, the diffs and things like that.